There are stories hidden between the lines of scripture, ancient echoes buried in the sands of forgotten centuries. Not all of them were allowed to reach the light. Some remained in shadows, passed down through whispered tales and obscure manuscripts that were never bound into the holy canon. These stories are not told in the synagogue, nor often from the pulpit, but they persist in the margins, dark, mysterious, and unsettling. Among these stories is one that concerns Solomon, son of David, the king whose wisdom was said to surpass that of all men. It is said that Solomon did not rise to such greatness by wisdom alone, but by something older and far more dangerous. The name Solomon evokes images of divine insight, flawless judgment, and sacred construction. He was the one who asked not for riches or vengeance, but for wisdom. He was granted a heart capable of discerning justice, a gift that brought him fame across distant lands. When two women came to him claiming the same child, it was Solomon who devised a test so clever that truth revealed itself without sword or blood. That moment, recorded in the first book of Kings, became a symbol of divine clarity bestowed upon a mortal king. But that is not the only Solomon who lives in ancient memory. There is another Solomon, one who does not wear the crown of golden virtue, but who walks among spirits and commands forces not of this world. In ancient apocryphal texts, esoteric traditions and mystical writings found far beyond Jerusalem's walls, Solomon appears not just as a wise ruler, but as a sorcerer, a master of arcane knowledge. Some writings claim he had dominion over demons. Others describe how he used magical tools, incantations, and forbidden symbols to compel invisible beings to do his bidding. These tales paint a far more complex image of the king, one in which holiness and heresy intertwine. It may come as a surprise to many who were taught only the canonized history of Israel as kings. Yet for centuries, in the scrolls of mystics, in the verses of Kabbalists, and in the annals of Islamic scholars, Solomon was remembered as one who had power over the jinn, as one who could speak the names of spirits and bind them to his will. These were not idle legends. They were carefully preserved, repeated, and studied. And though they were not welcomed into the scriptures of the mainstream, they were never fully dismissed. Why would such stories be told about the man God appointed to build his house? Why would a figure associated with light and wisdom be linked to darkness and secret arts? The answer is not easily given. There is no clear division between the sacred and the profane in these tales. Instead, they present a paradox, a holy man who may have wielded unholy power for holy purposes, a divine servant who perhaps learned to speak the language of spirits and shadows. It is not just a matter of myth and folklore. The traces of this narrative reach across cultures and centuries. In Judaism, Islam, and medieval occultism alike, Solomon is described not merely as a wise king, but as a magus, a seer, and a ruler of beings not bound by flesh. These narratives speak of a ring, of secret names, of hidden books filled with knowledge too potent for common eyes. They suggest that wisdom and power were not always acquired through prayer alone, but through confrontation with the supernatural. For many, such accounts are troubling. They suggest a side of Solomon that is rarely acknowledged, one that raises questions about the nature of his authority and the origins of his insight. If these traditions hold any truth, then Solomon was not simply wise. He was initiated into mysteries far beyond the understanding of his time, mysteries that required control over entities feared by the world. The very notion challenges the image of Solomon as an untarnished vessel of divine purpose. It forces a deeper examination of who he was, what he did, and what he may have unleashed. These are the themes that this journey will explore, not to dishonor the memory of Solomon, but to seek what lies beneath the polished stories, to uncover what was buried beneath the temple stones, both literal and symbolic. The path ahead leads through forgotten texts, rare manuscripts, and spiritual riddles that have perplexed scholars and believers for generations. It is a path that neither condemns nor justifies, but seeks to understand. What kind of man was Solomon truly? Was he merely a vessel of God's will, or did he choose to grasp power beyond the bounds of divine instruction? And if he did, what price was paid? This is not a simple retelling of a biblical life. It is an investigation into the boundaries of holiness and the reach of power. As we step into the world of hidden histories and mystical claims, we will question what was once assumed. We will examine stories that may have been cast aside for fear of what they reveal. And in doing so, we may come closer to understanding not just Solomon, but the delicate thread that separates wisdom from ambition, light from shadow. If Solomon indeed spoke to demons, if he commanded spirits, if he bent the forces of the unseen to his will, then his story is not just about wisdom. It is about danger, desire, and the cost of knowledge. And that story begins not in the palace, but in the silent places where ancient voices still speak. The story of Solomon's ring does not appear in the canonical books of the Bible, yet its legacy has endured for centuries through mystical literature, esoteric commentaries, and the folklore of spiritual scholars. Known as the Seal of Solomon, this ring is said to have been no ordinary ornament of kingship. It was a tool of power, shaped not only for ruling over people, but for commanding the invisible. Worn upon the hand of Israel's most revered monarch, it allegedly bore symbols so potent they could subdue spirits, compel demons to speak, and force the elements of the unseen world into obedience. Jewish mystical traditions, particularly within the writings of the early Kabbalists, refer to a ring engraved with divine symbols, most notably the sacred name of God. This name, composed of 4 Hebrew letters, was not meant to be spoken aloud. It was a mystery unto itself, a key to realities beyond perception. To inscribe it upon a ring was to embed divine authority into something tangible. According to these traditions, Solomon's wisdom was not simply intellectual, it was spiritual, metaphysical, and dangerous in its reach. The ring symbolized that reach. Its inscriptions allowed Solomon to bridge the physical and the spiritual, to issue commands that were obeyed by creatures not of flesh and blood. Visual depictions of the ring often include what is now known as the hexagram, a 6-pointed star formed by 2 interlocking triangles. In modern times, it is recognized as the Star of David, but its earlier usage had more arcane implications. It was believed to represent the union of opposites, the harmony of heaven and earth, and the balance of forces. In the context of Solomon's ring, it may have served as a conduit, a geometric gate through which divine energy could be focused. This shape was not ornamental, it was functional, designed to hold and direct power. Some traditions suggest that the pattern itself acted as a sigil, ensuring the obedience of the beings it was turned against. The ring's function was not only to bind, but also to communicate. Certain versions of the legend suggest that Solomon could summon spirits, speak their names, and demand answers. The ring became his authority, a divine signature that overruled even the rebellious nature of demons. These spirits, according to various writings, could not resist the ring's command. They were forced to reveal their identities, their natures, and in many cases, their weaknesses. They were made to labor, to build, to serve, and it was through this ring that Solomon enforced their obedience. The power attributed to the Seal of Solomon extended beyond control. It represented knowledge of a deeper kind. It was the knowledge of structure, the arrangement of creation itself. Those who have studied these traditions often point to the ring as more than a magical artifact. They see it as a symbol of dominion over chaos. In a world where unseen forces could disturb, deceive, or destroy, the ring brought order. It was a signature of divine rule impressed upon the hidden. The metal of the ring, as described in some mystical commentaries, was said to be a combination of brass and iron. Brass was traditionally associated with the heavens, with harmony and angelic power. Iron, in contrast, was tied to judgment, to strength, and at times to war. The union of these two elements reflected the ring's dual role, dominion over both the noble and the rebellious, over angels and demons alike. It was a balancing point between justice and mercy, discipline and understanding. There are accounts suggesting that Solomon never separated himself from the ring. It was kept close, guarded, hidden from common view. Its disappearance, when it allegedly occurred, led to chaos. Whether stolen, lost, or hidden away by divine decree, the absence of the ring was felt. It represented a break in command, a temporary shattering of order. These accounts may be more symbolic than literal, reflecting the idea that control over such forces was never meant to be taken lightly, and that power without humility can quickly turn to ruin. As centuries passed, and these stories were passed from one generation of mystics to the next, the Seal of Solomon transformed into more than just a historical curiosity. It became an icon of forbidden wisdom, the kind that tempts the heart and tests the soul. Those who studied it did so not with casual interest, but with caution. To even speak of it in some circles was considered dangerous, a flirtation with knowledge that might lead to the edge of understanding, and possibly beyond it. No concrete evidence of the ring has ever been found. Its reality exists in the tension between faith and legend, between history and myth. But the weight of its story has left deep impressions on the landscape of mystical thought. The ring, whether real or not, points toward a time when the boundaries between seen and unseen were thin, and when one man was said to hold the authority to speak not only to his people, but to the very shadows that surrounded them. To understand the Seal of Solomon is not only to explore an object of alleged supernatural power, it is to peer into the mind of a king who may have walked the fine line between divine commission and dangerous ambition. The ring remains a symbol of ultimate control over knowledge, over spirits, and perhaps even over the boundaries of what is permitted. Among the most controversial writings connected to the name of Solomon is a text known as the Testament of Solomon. This ancient manuscript, considered apocryphal and excluded from both Jewish and Christian canonical scriptures, offers a portrait of the king that is far removed from the dignified wisdom of Proverbs or the poetic longing of the Song of Songs. In its pages, Solomon is not merely a judge or a monarch, but a sorcerer king, seated in authority not only over men, but over demons. He does not merely seek to understand the world, he compels it into service. The text is written as a first-person account, attributed to Solomon himself, though its true authorship remains unknown. Most scholars believe it emerged during the early centuries of the Common Era, long after Solomon's death, yet it claims to preserve knowledge passed down through hidden channels. What makes the Testament of Solomon so distinct is not only its subject matter, but its unapologetic tone. It does not hesitate to describe interactions with malevolent beings, nor does it veil its fascination with the detailed hierarchies of the demonic world. It is part scripture, part magical manual, and part theological puzzle. According to the narrative, Solomon receives a ring from the archangel Michael, a ring engraved with a seal that grants him the power to control demons. With it, he sets out to build the great temple of Jerusalem, not through the labor of men alone, but by harnessing the strength of the spirit world. One by one, Solomon commands the demons to appear before him. They come not as vague forces, but as distinct entities, each with a name, a personality, and a particular area of influence. Some control fire, others stir lust. Still others govern sickness, deception, or natural phenomena. Solomon binds them, interrogates them, and forces them to explain how they operate. They confess the ways in which they influence humanity, and in some cases, they reveal the names or symbols that can be used to resist them. This structure, the binding and questioning of demons, echoes patterns found in later magical texts and grimoires. It reflects a worldview in which knowledge is power, and power can be acquired not through simple faith, but through mastery. The demons are not destroyed, nor are they cast into outer darkness. They are made useful. They are turned into laborers, forced to cut stones, carry heavy loads, and serve the construction of the temple. In doing so, the text presents a disturbing image, a holy place, designed for the worship of God, being raised by the hands of the damned. There is no clear moral judgment within the text. Solomon is not condemned for his actions. Instead, he is portrayed as authoritative, confident, and even curious. He asks the demons how they torment people, what signs reveal their presence, and how they can be defeated. The information he gathers is catalogued with meticulous detail. At times, the text even borders on the clinical, as if Solomon is compiling a divine encyclopedia of spiritual adversaries. This collection of demonology is one of the earliest surviving examples of such a systematized approach to supernatural entities, and it would go on to influence magical thought for centuries. What emerges from the Testament is not a story of possession and exorcism, but of command and structure. Solomon does not plead with these spirits, he orders them. He speaks their names with precision, and they obey. He builds a temple not only of stone, but of power, constructed upon secrets and enforced by dominion. It raises a profound question about the nature of authority. Some of the demons he describes appear grotesque and violent, others are subtle, tempting, or sorrowful. Many are associated with afflictions known to human life: madness, envy, chronic illness, fear. In naming them, Solomon brings clarity to their work, as if to strip them of their mystery. But the very act of recording such detail opens a door into shadowy realms. The reader of the Testament does not emerge untouched. The information once known cannot be easily forgotten. A recurring feature throughout the manuscript is the invocation of sacred names. Solomon compels the demons not through brute force, but by invoking higher authorities, names of angels, titles of divine power. This reinforces the idea that he is acting under license, not personal ambition. Yet the repeated emphasis on formulas, seals, and hidden knowledge blurs that line. The Solomon of the Testament does not operate like a prophet. He functions more like a high magician, one who has been granted access to layers of creation that others cannot even perceive. For centuries, the Testament of Solomon was copied and preserved by those intrigued by the esoteric. It was not accepted into sacred scripture, and it was not read aloud in public gatherings of faith, but it survived in monastic libraries, in hidden scrolls, and in the hands of those who studied the arcane. Its influence can be felt in later magical texts, which echo its methods and even reuse some of its language. The idea that demons could be known, catalogued, and commanded was given form here, long before it appeared in the grimoires of medieval Europe. The Testament of Solomon presents a tension that remains unresolved. On the one hand, it is a text of divine purpose, Solomon building the temple, fulfilling a holy task. On the other, it is steeped in the language of control, secrecy, and spiritual manipulation. It invites the reader to consider what lies beneath the surface of sacred ambition. If demons can be forced to labor for good, does that make the method righteous? Or does it expose a deeper compromise at the heart of the mission? As we turn its pages, we are left with an image not of Solomon, the wise seated calmly with scrolls of proverbs, but of Solomon, the master of spirits, wearing a ring of impossible power and gazing upon beings from dark realms, beings now forced to serve his will. Whether one sees this as divinely ordained or dangerously bold depends not only on belief, but on how one views the boundary between light and shadow. The question of whether Solomon acted under divine sanction or fell into the snare of forbidden knowledge is one that cuts to the heart of both theological doctrine and spiritual ethics. It is not enough to marvel at his power or to catalogue the demons he allegedly commanded. The deeper issue lies in the origin and legitimacy of that power. Was it given by God for a higher purpose, or was it seized by Solomon through means that, while effective, stood in violation of divine law? Scripture presents Solomon as uniquely favored. In 1 Kings chapter 3, he famously asks not for wealth or vengeance, but for wisdom to govern rightly. God responds with generosity, granting him not only the wisdom he sought, but riches and honor beyond measure. The early years of Solomon's reign reflect a man walking in harmony with divine will, his decisions marked by clarity and his leadership blessed with peace. But as his story unfolds, a gradual shift begins to surface. He amasses wealth, takes many wives, most of them foreign, and eventually builds high places for other gods. The man who once asked for understanding becomes a king whose heart turns away. Yet even before this decline, the supposed use of demonic forces raises troubling questions. The law of Moses contains explicit warnings against engaging with the spiritual realm in unholy ways. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 12, it is written that no one should practice divination, sorcery, or consult with spirits. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31, warns against turning to mediums or necromancers, declaring that such acts defile the soul. These are not vague suggestions, they are direct commands, delivered with the gravity of divine law. How then can one reconcile these prohibitions with the traditions that present Solomon as a master of demons? The apparent contradiction has long troubled theologians, prompting various interpretations. One view argues that Solomon's actions, though mysterious, were under divine permission. The ring, given by an angel, would represent not rebellion, but authorization. The summoning of spirits would not be witchcraft, but a sacred duty, governed by spiritual laws that God himself placed in motion. This view, while charitable, rests on the assumption that Solomon remained faithful during the period in which he exercised such power. If the demons were bound to serve the construction of the temple, then perhaps this use of spiritual force was not an act of hubris, but of sacred obedience. God had appointed Solomon to build the temple. If extraordinary means were required to complete such a task, then perhaps the tools, however strange, were justified. But this explanation is not without its difficulties. The methods described in texts like the Testament of Solomon are filled with ritualistic details, names of power, magical symbols, and invocations that bear more resemblance to occult practice than to prophecy or priestly service. There is no suggestion that Solomon simply prayed and waited. He acted, spoke, compelled. He investigated the weaknesses of spirits and used those weaknesses to bind them. The character of these actions aligns more with the figure of a ritual magician than a prophet or a priest. Another interpretation sees this very alignment as the heart of the problem. According to this view, Solomon did indeed begin his reign under divine guidance, but his pursuit of wisdom became tainted by a hunger for control. The acquisition of knowledge, once pure, evolved into a desire for domination, not just over men, but over the cosmos itself. In this reading, Solomon crossed a line. His use of demons was not permitted but tolerated, a warning sign of his eventual fall. This position gains weight when considering the broader narrative of Solomon's life. His decline was not abrupt, it was a slow turning. A man whose intellect outpaced his humility, a ruler whose early purity was eroded by compromise. By the time Solomon began building temples for foreign gods, it was no longer surprising. The seeds of spiritual compromise had already been sown. His alleged dealings with demons, if true, may have marked the beginning of that shift. a willingness to use what was forbidden so long as the end appeared holy. And yet, the mystery remains. Why would God allow such practices if they were truly evil? Why not strike Solomon down or strip him of his authority? The answer may lie in the nature of divine testing. Not every gift is a reward. Some are trials. In Psalm 106 verse 15, it is written that God granted the people their request, but sent leanness into their soul. Sometimes what is given is not an endorsement, but a measure of judgment. Power without restraint becomes its own snare. Solomon may have been tested not by what he lacked, but by what he was allowed to hold. The ring, if it ever existed, was not only a source of dominion, but a temptation. The knowledge of spirits, not only a tool, but a threshold. Once crossed, such boundaries cannot easily be uncrossed. The spiritual authority granted to Israel's king became a question mark, a riddle that lingers to this day. Throughout history, theologians have walked carefully around this issue. Most avoid endorsing the occult elements of Solomon's legend, while still holding fast to his divine selection. Some propose that the apocryphal stories are exaggerations, crafted by later mystics who projected their interests backward onto the king's legacy. Others suggest that a portion of truth resides in the tales, that Solomon did indeed explore mysteries too deep for comfort. Ultimately, the image of Solomon standing between two realms, light and darkness, obedience and ambition, becomes a mirror for all who seek wisdom. There is a wisdom that comes from God, and a wisdom that imitates it, twisted by pride. The two may look alike at first, but their fruits are different. One leads to deeper reverence, the other to a craving for control. In this light, the question is no longer just about Solomon. It becomes a question for every soul entrusted with knowledge and influence. What is the source of your wisdom? What price are you willing to pay to see what others cannot? And when the border between holy and forbidden becomes thin, will you recognize the line before it disappears beneath your feet? The construction of the first temple stands as one of the most revered accomplishments in the ancient history of Israel. According to the biblical account, it was a divine commission, a task entrusted uniquely to Solomon after his father David was denied the opportunity. The temple was to be a dwelling place for the name of the Lord, a sacred structure to house the Ark of the Covenant, and a focal point of worship for the chosen people. Its construction involved vast resources, careful planning, and 7 years of labor. But within the quiet spaces of mystical tradition, another layer of this story is told, one that replaces the sounds of chisels and saws with the whispers of compulsion and the rustling presence of spirits pressed into service. In apocryphal texts and occult writings, the labor behind the temple's grandeur is not attributed solely to human effort. Instead, bound demons and spirits are said to have played a central role, compelled into obedience by Solomon's ring and his knowledge of their true names. These beings, drawn from realms invisible to human eyes, were forced to haul stones too heavy for ordinary men, shape materials with unnatural precision, and execute tasks at speeds beyond mortal capacity. What should have been a work of sacred devotion becomes, in these accounts, a stage for the subjugation of spiritual forces. The Testament of Solomon provides detailed descriptions of these interactions. Solomon calls forth demons one by one, interrogates them about their powers and weaknesses, and then binds them into service. Among them is Orneus, a spirit who troubles a young boy working on the temple, stealing his vitality and sabotaging his labor. Solomon captures Orneus, questions him, and forces him to reveal other demons. As they are brought in, each one is assigned a task. One moves great stones, another carves with fire, another mixes water with lime, creating a binding mortar. These are not symbols or poetic metaphors. The text speaks of their involvement as direct and physical, making it clear that the temple was not just a spiritual monument, It was a battleground of control. Such descriptions create a complex image of the temple itself. In the canonical texts, the structure is filled with gold and cedar, its walls adorned with cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. Everything is measured, consecrated, and sanctified. The Ark of the Covenant rests in the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, where only the high priest may enter. Yet in the apocryphal narratives, beneath this divine order lies a foundation shaped by the unwilling hands of rebellious spirits. The contradiction is not subtle. It presses deeply into the question of what makes something holy. Can the outcome remain sacred if the means are drawn from the profane? The forced labor of these spirits was not random. Solomon is said to have assigned each demon a task suited to its nature or strength. Some excelled in moving massive weights, others in creating fire or manipulating elements. The king's knowledge of their characteristics allowed him to utilize them with maximum efficiency. Their resistance was broken by the ring, their identities exposed by the invocation of sacred names. Through these means, they were not only subdued, they were organized. The construction of the temple became a symbol not just of religious dedication, but of Solomon's capacity to impose order upon chaos itself. There is also mention of demons who resisted. Some refused their assignments or attempted to flee. Solomon, according to the text, subdued them by invoking higher angelic powers, often calling upon specific angels who had dominion over the spirits in question. This hierarchical structure mirrors the systems found in later mystical writings, where every spirit of darkness is paired with a corresponding force of light, each overseeing the other in a cosmic balance. The king did not rely solely on the ring. He operated with a broader spiritual arsenal, combining knowledge, ritual, and authority. For those who held these stories as true, the temple became more than a house of worship. It stood as a monument to dominion, both divine and arcane. It was a place where the boundary between holiness and hidden power was not only crossed, but built into the very walls. This tension would linger long after the stones were set. For every sacred vessel within, there was a tale of how it came to be, whether shaped by human hands, angelic guidance, or demonic compulsion. Even the dedication of the temple, described in the biblical record as a moment of awe and divine presence, gains a shadow when placed alongside these alternative accounts. The cloud of glory that filled the sanctuary, the fire that descended from heaven, these signs of acceptance do not erase the stories of what built the frame. They coexist in silence, leaving room for speculation about the true cost of such perfection. These narratives do not reduce the temple's significance. They elevate it into a space of deep spiritual mystery. It becomes a focal point not only for faith, but for questions about the use of power, the relationship between light and darkness, and the ability of one man to impose will upon both realms. The temple, in this view, is not merely a place where heaven touches earth. It is a product of their collision. Solomon, as the architect and overseer, becomes not only a king of men, but a governor of spirits. His wisdom is no longer just intellectual or political. It becomes structural, mechanical, mystical. The temple itself becomes his ultimate expression, an edifice formed by the hands of angels, men, and demons alike, all moving in accordance with his command. Whether that command was righteous or reckless is a question left open, buried beneath the stones of history. The accounts surrounding Solomon's dominion over spirits do not speak in vague or abstract terms. They name the entities, describe their appearances, define their abilities, and record the commands given to them. This is not the language of allegory. It is the language of structure, hierarchy, and function. According to the apocryphal Testament of Solomon and other mystical writings, the demonic realm was not chaotic, but highly organized. Each demon had a name, a specific domain of influence, and often a particular method by which it could be summoned or subdued. Solomon did not face a faceless enemy. He interacted with an intricate network of spiritual intelligences, each with a unique role in the unseen world. One of the first demons Solomon encounters in these texts is Orneas. Described as a vampire-like spirit, Orneas torments a young boy by draining his vitality and stealing his daily wages of food. He operates not through violence, but through invisible depletion, weakening his victim without leaving a wound. When brought before Solomon, Orneas speaks of his origins and his abilities, confessing that he can shapeshift, cause pain in the ribs, and sow confusion. His capture marks the beginning of Solomon's broader campaign to identify and bind the spirits that disturb creation. Orneas becomes a tool in Solomon's hand, eventually used to summon other demons, revealing their names and bringing them into submission. As the list grows, more complex and dangerous figures appear. One of the most infamous is Asmodeus, a spirit associated with lust, jealousy, and destructive passion. In the Testament of Solomon, Asmodeus is bound in chains and forced to labor on the temple. He boasts of his power to incite unfaithfulness, to shatter marriages, and to influence the desires of men and women alike. His symbolic weight is considerable. He's not merely a demon of desire, but of distortion, one who warps what is sacred into something self-serving. In binding him, Solomon does not eliminate the force of lust, but places it under watch, acknowledging its power while preventing it from ruling unchecked. Another prominent spirit is Beelzebul, often interpreted as a high-ranking figure within the demonic order. He identifies himself as the prince of the demons, speaking with authority and recognizing Solomon's ring as a sign of divine license. His presence implies a structured hierarchy within the realm of spirits, with levels of command, titles of rank, and systems of allegiance. This organization reflects a mirror of celestial order, fallen, yet still maintained with logic and clarity. The demonic is not a realm of chaos, but of twisted structure, where power flows downward in imitation of heavenly design. Other spirits are described with less grandeur, but no less specificity. There is a female demon who causes bodily pain and swelling, another that spreads madness. One affects the stomach, another the head, another the throat. Some influence the stars and seasons, others dwell in particular winds or waters. Each one, when interrogated, reveals its function and the method of its defeat, sometimes by the name of an angel, other times by a ritual or symbol. Solomon listens, records, and assigns. The method by which these spirits are questioned follows a consistent pattern. They are summoned by name, brought into the presence of the king, and forced to reveal their identity. They are not merely rebuked, they are categorized. The implication is clear. Knowledge of their true nature grants dominion. To name a thing is to define it, and in defining it, one gains power over it. This principle echoes throughout mystical literature. It is not only the strength of will that matters, but the precision of understanding. Solomon's greatness lies not in brute strength, but in his capacity to identify and order what others feared. Within these accounts, the demonic realm is presented almost like a bureaucracy, each entity tasked with a specific effect upon the world. The notion of a hierarchy implies that rebellion among the spirits did not abolish their structure. Instead, it was corrupted. Where once angels served divine purposes in harmonious order, the fallen now serve distorted purposes under rulers of their own choosing. Yet their structure remains legible, traceable, and susceptible to interruption by those who understand it. Solomon, in this context, is portrayed as the one man who not only knew of these structures, but could interact with them directly. He did not merely cast demons away, he interrogated them, used them, and pressed them into service. His ring did not destroy, it controlled. The demons feared the seal not because it hurt them, but because it commanded obedience. And Solomon's wisdom extended into the darkest places, not by avoidance, but by authority. The symbolic meaning of these demons adds another layer to the narrative. Ornias represents unseen decay, the kind that saps strength without explanation. Asmodeus embodies perversion of sacred bonds. Beelzebul reflects the pride of leadership turned against its origin. Others symbolize disease, fear, confusion, vanity, and wrath. Each one corresponds not only to external realities, but to inner struggles. The hierarchy is not only external, it mirrors the human soul, with its layered desires, its contradictions, and its weaknesses. Solomon's record of these beings becomes a kind of spiritual map. It traces the contours of affliction, not merely to resist it, but to understand its roots. The act of naming, questioning, and binding does not erase the presence of evil. It brings clarity. It confronts the hidden. It reveals that the forces which trouble the world are not as undefined as they appear. They have names, origins, and limits. Through these writings, the image of Solomon grows darker but also deeper. He is not a man untouched by evil. He is a man who stood in its presence, recorded its movements, and for a time ruled over it. Whether this was wisdom or a dangerous flirtation with the forbidden is a question that continues to echo. What remains undeniable is the scope of what these texts suggest, that Solomon's reach extended far beyond his palace walls, into realms where names carry weight, and where the one who speaks them holds the key to power. The figure of Solomon as an exorcist stands in stark contrast to the image of him as a ruler of demons. It introduces a tension that has long puzzled those who study the mystical and apocryphal accounts of his life. On one side, he is seen as a sovereign who subjects spirits to his will, bending them into tools of labor and extracting their secrets. On the other, he is portrayed as a holy man who invokes the sacred to drive out evil, purifying the afflicted and restoring order. These roles are not mutually exclusive, but their coexistence creates a profound spiritual paradox. Solomon does not merely walk the line between light and darkness, he appears to operate on both sides, invoking the highest names to command the lowest forces. Within the Testament of Solomon and related mystical writings, the practice of exorcism is not a peripheral element, it is central. Solomon's method is precise and formulaic. He does not confront demons with abstract faith or vague declarations. He uses specific names, drawn from angelic hierarchies and divine titles. These names are not casual invocations. They are utterances of power, each one linked to an aspect of the divine presence. Some names reflect God's justice, others his mercy, still others his authority over creation itself. By speaking them, Solomon is able to compel demons to reveal their purposes, to confess their methods, and most importantly, to depart from the bodies and lives of those they oppress. The language he uses is often constructed in layers. The demon is first addressed by its true name, which strips away its mask. Then comes the command, built upon sacred phrases that mirror the structure of celestial authority. The spirit, now exposed and cornered, is given a task or expelled entirely. The success of these rituals depends not on the force of Solomon's voice, but on the accuracy of his invocation. Knowledge, once again, proves to be the key. This reliance on divine names places Solomon's exorcisms within a specific spiritual framework. He does not rely on his own strength. He does not plead or bargain. He acts as a representative of divine order, a vessel through which higher authority flows. In this sense, Solomon becomes a mediator, standing between the afflicted and the unseen forces that torment them. The demons fear the names he speaks not because of him, but because those names carry the imprint of heavenly command. The seal on his ring may bind, but the names he utters cleanse. The accounts describe him casting out demons from individuals who suffer strange afflictions, seizures, madness, fevers, compulsions, nightmares. The symptoms are diverse, but the source, according to the texts, is consistent. Spiritual interference. The exorcisms restore balance, they lift oppression, they re-establish the boundary between the human and the demonic. In these moments, Solomon is not a sorcerer but a healer, not a manipulator but a deliverer. And yet, even in these acts of restoration, the shadow of control remains. There is a lingering question about his motives. Was Solomon invoking the names of God purely out of reverence, or was he using them as instruments of power? The sacred cannot be reduced to formulas, but in Solomon's rituals there is a risk of reducing the divine to a system. This danger becomes sharper when considering that the same names used to cast out demons were also used to compel them into labor. The same voice that banished a spirit from a suffering man might later call another into bondage. The line between servant and master becomes thin. Solomon's use of divine names was not reckless. The texts suggest a deep reverence and awareness of their weight, but reverence alone does not guarantee righteousness. In Levitical law, the name of God is to be honored, not used for manipulation. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 7, it is written that the Lord will not hold guiltless the one who takes his name in vain. This warning does not only apply to casual blasphemy, it extends to any use of the sacred that treats it as a tool rather than a trust. In Solomon's case, his actions straddle this divide. His exorcisms bring healing. They align with the will of God, restoring what has been twisted. But they are also deeply tied to a system of control, one where names, symbols, and invocations are used with mechanical precision. It is this duality that has kept the image of Solomon so complex. He is both an agent of cleansing and a wielder of hidden arts. Some traditions attempt to resolve this tension by claiming that Solomon acted under direct divine instruction. The ring was given by an angel. The names were revealed through revelation. The demons were bound not for curiosity, but for necessity. If this view is accepted, then Solomon's actions are not acts of sorcery, but of stewardship. He becomes a guardian of spiritual order, entrusted with knowledge that others could not bear. Others view his practices as a slippery descent. What began as genuine service turned into control. What started as obedience morphed into possession, not of spirits, but of authority that did not truly belong to him. In this interpretation, Solomon did not fall in an instant. His fall began in the very rituals that appeared holy, but carried within them the seeds of pride. The image of Solomon as an exorcist is powerful. It shows a king who did not distance himself from suffering, but who entered the struggle against darkness directly. It shows a man who faced the spirits that tormented others, and who silenced them with words drawn from the heavens. But it also shows the risks of holding too much power, of treating the sacred as a system to be mastered rather than a mystery to be revered. In the end, Solomon stands not merely as a practitioner of exorcism, but as a symbol of its limits. His ability to cast out demons, to bind spirits, and to speak names of power does not preserve him from his later decline. It reminds us that the authority to confront evil must be grounded in humility. Without it, even the most sacred name can become a tool of pride, and even the greatest wisdom can drift into ruin. The final chapter of Solomon's life does not resemble the brilliance of his early reign. What began with divine favor and unmatched wisdom gradually unraveled into compromise and disobedience. The biblical record in 1 Kings chapter 11 presents a stark contrast to the king's earlier devotion. Solomon, once dedicated to the God of Israel alone, allowed his heart to turn toward foreign deities. Altars were raised not to honor the Lord, but to appease the gods of his many wives. Shrines built on the hills surrounding Jerusalem, marking a slow but decisive departure from the covenant he was once chosen to uphold. Marriages with foreign women, while politically strategic, became spiritual liabilities. These unions introduced not only foreign customs, but religious influences that grew stronger with time. The influence was not superficial. The king participated. He joined in their rituals, permitted their idols within the city, and eventually began to serve these gods alongside the one who had given him the throne. The spiritual cost of these decisions becomes clear as his earlier clarity dissolves into contradiction. The same man who prayed at the temple's dedication, acknowledging the greatness of God, later bowed before lifeless idols. This erosion did not occur overnight. It was a process of small permissions, incremental tolerance, and quiet decisions made without repentance. Where once Solomon had sought wisdom from above, he now leaned into relationships that pulled his gaze elsewhere. The law had warned against this very path. Deuteronomy chapter 17 outlines the boundaries for a king. He must not acquire many wives, amass excessive wealth, or allow his heart to rise above his brethren. Solomon failed on each count. Wealth poured into his kingdom. His harem grew into the hundreds. His heart, once humble, began to drift. Beyond these political and relational compromises, his earlier interactions with spirits and hidden knowledge invite deeper scrutiny. In the apocryphal accounts, Solomon's dealings with demons were marked by control, ritual precision, and authoritative command. But such control, once internalized, can subtly shift into presumption. The ability to bind spirits, speak their names, and turn their power toward construction or interrogation may have reinforced an illusion of invulnerability. Commanding the invisible can lead one to believe he is untouchable. When spiritual knowledge is pursued without constant submission, it becomes a breeding ground for pride. What had begun as a sacred duty to build a dwelling place for the name of the Lord may have become overshadowed by Solomon's confidence in his own understanding. His wisdom was no longer simply a gift to be stewarded, but a possession to be exercised freely. The rituals, the ring, the invocations all gave him access to realms most dared not enter. Without accountability, that access may have become a gateway to spiritual compromise. Instead of distancing himself from darkness after the temple's completion, Solomon allowed conflicting allegiances to coexist. The temple remained in place, but its purity was compromised by what rose beside it. High places for gods like Chemosh and Moloch stood within sight of the sanctuary, their smoke mingling with that of the offerings brought before the altar of the Lord. The sacred no longer stood alone. It shared the city with its imitation. The consequences were not only personal, divine judgment was pronounced over the kingdom itself. The Lord declared through the prophet Ahijah that the kingdom would be torn, leaving only a fragment for Solomon's son. This judgment reflected more than punishment. It illustrated the principle that leadership carries weight beyond the individual. When the spiritual anchor of a nation weakens, the foundation begins to crack. Solomon's actions did not occur in isolation. They rippled through history. His spiritual decline is not framed in Scripture as an explosive rebellion. It is portrayed as something more dangerous. Subtle deviation, tolerated sin, and repeated compromise. That is where the danger lay. He did not outwardly reject the Lord. He simply permitted other voices to speak beside him. The absoluteness of God's covenant became diluted, and the exclusivity of worship faded beneath layers of accommodation. The image of Solomon, once surrounded by the cloud of God's glory in the temple, ends with division in his household and uncertainty in his legacy. He remains a figure of immense wisdom, but also of great contradiction. The same mind that delivered inspired proverbs failed to uphold the most essential truth, fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. His understanding reached into heavenly and hidden things, yet he stumbled over the very commandments given to guard his heart. In his story, the cost of misused power becomes painfully clear. Knowledge and spiritual authority, when detached from obedience, do not preserve. They expose. The very gifts meant to elevate Solomon became the tools through which his pride was fed. His downfall does not disprove his greatness. It reveals the fragile line that runs between divine favor and personal ambition. The final years of his reign leave a legacy not only of splendor, but of warning. Wisdom, unanchored, becomes vulnerable. Power, unchecked, breeds illusion. And a heart divided will always wander, no matter how gifted or chosen the vessel. The traditions that claim Solomon commanded demons, wielded a magical ring, and authored forbidden writings like the Testament of Solomon are deeply embedded in mystical and esoteric lore. Yet, when measured against historical and scriptural records, the line between legend and reality becomes difficult to maintain. The canonical books, 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Ecclesiastes, present Solomon as a wise and powerful king, but they do not mention his use of magic or dealings with spiritual beings in any literal or detailed sense. His downfall is attributed to idolatry, not sorcery. The Testament of Solomon, a key source of these claims, is widely dated by scholars to the early centuries of the Common Era. Written long after Solomon's time, it reflects the culture of late antiquity, steeped in angelology, demonology, and mystical structures foreign to the earlier Hebrew worldview. Its themes mirror those of Greco-Roman magical texts more than biblical prophecy. The text describes Solomon binding demons, naming them, and forcing them to reveal their functions. Yet it lacks historical authentication and bears marks of later theological development. From an archaeological standpoint, nothing has been discovered in Jerusalem or ancient Israel that would support the existence of magical instruments attributed to Solomon. Excavations around the Temple Mount have revealed remnants of large-scale construction and suggest a centralized monarchy, but no physical evidence, rings, seals, or ritual tools has confirmed the use of spiritual control in the building of the temple. The historical Solomon was likely a brilliant administrator and builder, but the stories of demonic labor remain confined to religious imagination. However, the ancient Near East was a region where magic and religion often coexisted. In Egypt, Babylon, and Canaan, rulers commonly invoked divine or spiritual forces through rituals. This cultural backdrop may explain how Solomon, famed for his wisdom, became the ideal figure through whom mystical teachings and magical legends evolved. As Jewish mysticism grew in later centuries, particularly in early Kabbalistic traditions, Solomon was increasingly seen as a master of secrets, a conduit between divine wisdom and practical power. In the Middle Ages, Christian and occult writers expanded this image further. Texts like the Key of Solomon and Lemegeton attributed entire magical systems to his name. These works offer detailed instructions for summoning spirits, drawing magical circles, and invoking angelic names, yet none of them originate from Solomon's time, nor do they reflect his biblical persona. Rather, they represent how his reputation was adapted to suit later mystical systems. While there is no reliable historical basis for Solomon's use of magic or demonology, the persistence of these stories reveals something meaningful. They reflect a long-standing human fascination with authority over the unseen. Solomon, as the wisest man of his age, became a symbolic figure, one who stood at the threshold between divine revelation and forbidden knowledge. His legend became a mirror of deeper spiritual concerns: how wisdom can become corrupted, how divine gifts can be misunderstood, and how power, if unchecked, can lead to spiritual collapse. These tales then may not be factual, but they are not without truth. They warn against pride, disguised as insight, control mistaken for authority, and knowledge pursued without humility. In that sense, even the most fantastical legends about Solomon speak to enduring spiritual realities, ones still worth contemplating today. Solomon's legacy, with all its complexity, stands as a towering symbol of both divine potential and human frailty. He was granted a gift unlike any before him, a heart tuned to wisdom, a mind able to discern justice, and a spirit entrusted with governing a chosen people. His name became synonymous with understanding, his sayings studied and revered. Yet even he, in all his brilliance, could not escape the gravitational pull of pride, compromise, and spiritual drift. Whether the stories of his dealings with spirits and forbidden knowledge are to be taken as literal events or symbolic parables, they reveal enduring spiritual truths that stretch far beyond their historical details. At the heart of Solomon's rise was a request that pleased God. He asked not for long life or military power, but for discernment to lead well. That desire opened the gates of heaven's generosity. Wisdom flowed freely. Peace surrounded his borders. Resources were abundant. The temple, a structure promised to his father David, was completed under his hand. And with each passing year, Solomon's reputation grew, drawing visitors from distant lands, all eager to witness the wisdom of Israel's king. But wisdom, even when granted by divine favor, is not self-sustaining. It must be guarded, nourished, and continuously anchored in humility. Solomon's tragedy was not that he lost his wisdom, but that he lost sight of its source. The more he accumulated, wives, wealth, foreign alliances, the more his heart fragmented. Discernment gave way to diplomacy, and the uncompromising truth of God's covenant began to share space with idols and divided loyalties. In time, the man who had once dedicated the temple with trembling reverence stood silent as altars rose to foreign gods. This journey reflects a spiritual principle that transcends the specific details of Solomon's story. Divine gifts, no matter how extraordinary, do not override the need for faithfulness. Power given without continued surrender becomes dangerous. Wisdom, when divorced from obedience, becomes manipulation. Authority, even spiritual authority, can become a trap when it ceases to be an act of service and becomes a tool for control. Even the apocryphal stories of Solomon commanding demons can be read through this lens. Whether one believes he truly bound spirits or not, the image of a man exercising dominion over hidden forces captures a spiritual danger. The temptation to use divine tools for personal mastery rather than holy service. It is not the presence of knowledge that corrupts, it is the posture of the heart toward that knowledge. The same ring said to control demons may also symbolize control taken too far, influence wielded without accountability. Solomon's downfall was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. That too is instructive. Spiritual erosion rarely begins with outright rebellion. It begins with toleration of lesser truths, small compromises, and misplaced confidence. When the fear of God becomes assumed rather than pursued, even the wisest can fall. The collapse does not come from lack of insight, but from lack of intimacy with the one who gives insight. Yet his story is not only a warning, it also offers hope and clarity for those who seek wisdom today. True wisdom is not merely intelligence or strategic thinking, it is rooted in reverence. Psalm 111 verse 10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." That fear is not terror, but awe, an unshakable awareness of God's holiness, power, and nearness. It is what preserves the heart when power expands and knowledge deepens. Discernment is not about decoding hidden mysteries or mastering spiritual systems. It is the daily posture of listening, obeying, and remaining tethered to the truth. Solomon had every gift, but it was discernment that he first asked for, and it was discernment that he failed to maintain. His story teaches that spiritual authority is not proven by miracles, secrets, or control, but by humility, faithfulness, and clarity in the midst of complexity. In a world that often admires knowledge for its own sake, Solomon's life reminds us that wisdom without submission is hollow, power without reverence is dangerous, and gifts without grounding become burdens. He remains one of history's most extraordinary figures, not only for his greatness, but for how deeply his fall echoes the condition of every human heart. We are all capable of rising through grace and of falling through pride. To reflect on Solomon's life is to be reminded that no one is beyond the need for accountability. No level of understanding exempts us from the call to obey. No spiritual experience replaces the necessity of returning again and again to the feet of the One who gives wisdom freely to those who ask with a pure heart. The journey of Solomon is not just ancient history, it is a mirror. The legends, the writings, the temple, the ring, all of it leads to one timeless truth. Wisdom is not possession, it is alignment. It flows not from control, but from surrender. And only when the soul remains in awe of the divine does wisdom endure beyond the veil of mystery. If this journey into the deeper and often hidden aspects of Solomon's legacy spoke to you, if it stirred your curiosity, challenged your perspective, or gave you something new to reflect on, then consider becoming part of this growing community. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss future explorations into the spiritual, the historical, and the mysterious. Like this video if it offered you value or insight. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. What surprised you most? What challenged your thinking? Or what questions remain? And if someone in your life would find this message meaningful, send it their way. Share it with those you care about. Together, we can continue uncovering stories that matter, stories that speak not only of the past, but to the heart of who we are today.